welcome to Macros with Mythili, our weekly program that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in the country and overseas. This week we're going to direct that hard look to the mess in the power sector, notably in power distribution, that has defied an answer not once but twice. Now as the government toys with the rescue for the third time running and with taxpayer money, with a minister who has just been honoured with the Business Reformer of the Year award by the Economic Times, our sister publication, we're going to discuss the pros and cons of the possible alternatives with a panel of experts. Dr Govinda Rao, former Director NIPFP and member of the 14th Finance Commission, Pradeep Kumar, Managing Director, State Bank of India, and Uma Shankar, former Power Secretary, Government of India. Welcome to the show. Mr. Uma Shankar, if I could start with you. If you were to single out the single biggest factor that to your mind is responsible for the mess in the power distribution sector, what would that be?
Very clearly, the distribution segment is the most challenging segment in the power sector. And we have been talking about the bad financial condition of distribution companies ever since they were set up. I recall from 1948 onwards, when the SCBs were set up, I don't think I have read anywhere in the literature about the condition of distribution companies' finances being good. I only read about it being bad, getting worse, or on the brink of collapse and reaching a point of no return and so on. All these years we've been, I think, grappling with probably the same 2-3 issues. One issue is cost not being, the tariffs not being cost reflective. That has been there throughout, say, the last 60, 70 odd years, when the distribution companies have been in business before as SCBs, now as distribution companies. The second is our inability to control AT&C losses. This has also been the theme running right through any kind of literature you may read about the distribution companies or the electricity business as such. And a third important factor I would look at would be the kind of what shall we say, subsidies the governments announce from time to time, mostly populist, and then don't meet those subsidies or pay those subsidies out. Either they don't pay them at all or they don't pay in time. My feeling is that these are 3 most important reasons why we see the finances of SCBs or distribution companies being in such a bad shape. We can go into reasons as to why the cost is, the tariffs are not cost reflective, time taken to revise tariffs and so on. But these are the 3 major reasons why distribution company finances are in such disarray.
Govind, would you agree with that assessment of Mr. Uma Shankar? That he's listed various reasons. Would you agree with this?
Well, I think Uma Shankar is an expert who has dabbled his hand in the power sector. But let me also say that the single major factor in the power sector finances is basically the soft budget constraint you have. Power sector, in fact, it's the regulators don't. There is a huge amount of politicization. The tariffs have not kept pace with the cost of power supply, and then the regulators don't really allow the cost, thing to be increased, because they basically play politics along with the state governments. And obviously one of the major problems, in fact, is not even finances. Even when the power sector finances are okay, that so what they do is, in fact, so long whenever there is the cost of power is more than the price that they get per power, they do outages. In fact, all these programs that you have had is basically to bail out the power sector, the DISCOMs, or help the generators, or help the banks, and it is not for any benefit for the consumer, because many of the DISCOMs have been doing several hours of outages, and in order to keep their finances afloat. But then it's a consumer's interest has never been in the radar of the entire reform, including the one that is proposed. So we do have a problem of politicization. We do have a problem of soft budget constraint, and obviously the power deficit is not a part of the overall fiscal deficit, and that's what precisely the Finance Commission suggested. You make it a part of sort of extended debt, and deficit should be the part of should be the target for fiscal deficit reduction. and that would require you to audit your accounts. Many of these discoms don't, we don't even know the proper picture because they have not audited them, they don't have the audited accounts properly. So we have a huge problem, and this type of it is basically giving some oxygen from time to time. So that you see the finances are taken care of, but the consumers are never taken into account.
Okay, let me ask Pradeep that question. Pradeep, I think both Mr. Uma Shankar as well as Govind gave a number of reasons why the power sector is in the mess, and I think Govind make a slightly unkind cut to a banker. As a former banker myself, I would have thought that it's never the banks who are bailed out, it's invariably the political class that is bailed out, and bankers are left holding the can, particularly public sector banks like State Bank of India. Would you agree that it's not lack of willingness, not inability rather, it's a lack of willingness on the part of the government to really do something about the power sector subsidies, which leaves banks in the miserable position that they are today?
Mythili, I was not able to hear properly what Mr. Uma Shankar said, but in general I agree with what Mr. Govinda Rao was saying with the problems of the power sector, of the distribution. Basically, tariffs have to be market driven depending on the cost of purchase, or the cost of procurement of power and the cost of distribution of power. Unfortunately, I think many of the state electricity regulation commissions do not act independently. They always look to the government for direction, and I don't think the tariffs are fixed based on the cost estimates. To the AT&D losses, operational losses, I think this has not been handled properly at all. This is a political issue. I think the DISCOMs know who are the people who steal power, who are the people who don't pay for the dues, but I think there is no political willingness to correct this. So unless there is a political willingness to correct this, the T&D losses will be very difficult to handle. Even electricity regulator, the SERCs, I think we have to have professionals there manning the SERCs like we have in the CERC, which is fairly independent. And if the SCR is independent, I am sure that tariff fixation will be proper. The other point is, yes, if state government wants to give subsidy to some class of users, I think the state government has to provide that subsidy in the budget as in pass on to the DISCOMs. Otherwise, what happens, DISCOMs continue to incur losses and they are looked to fund the losses. How do they fund the losses? Either they take loans from the banks or they delay paying the creditors. These are the two only ways that they can fund their losses. Yes, banks to an extent have been guilty in willing to fund the losses. In many cases, banks could have said no, beyond which we will not be able to fund a loss. But many a times the state government intervenes and says, yes, we will be paying it off, you need not worry, the losses of the DISCOMs will be funded by the state government. But of course, things have not happened the way the bankers wanted.
Absolutely, things have not happened the way we would wish. But Mr. Uma Shankar, Pradeep touched upon a very interesting and important point in the entire issue, the independence of regulators. Now, the problem with the regulators as they have them today is that they are mostly ex-bureaucrat, and it's very difficult for them to break away from the traditions of the past, towing the line of their political masters. So we really haven't seen independent regulators. What can we do about having independence in regulation? As a former bureaucrat yourself, what would you suggest we do?
Okay, see, the regulators or the regulatory system is independent and it has been created to be independent. A regulator does not fear losing his job, he cannot be removed.
He should not fear, let me put it that way, but I don't know whether it works.
Let me complete. The point I am saying is, you can only make a person free, but if he does not want to be free, what do you do with him? You have created a commission, you have put the person in a place where he need not worry about losing his job. He does not have to listen to anyone. But if he is willing to do that, if he is willing to give up his independence, there is very little that you can do. There have been some thoughts about how does one ensure the independence of regulators. Can we look at reviewing the work of regulators? Can we provide for a system where you can remove a regulator or a commission on the basis of non-performance? You know, these have been thoughts which have been going on for some time. You again come to the situation of regulating the regulator. You know, this becomes very complex. The point I am only trying to say is that you can only make the system in which a regulator is placed free from all political interference. But if the person does not willing to accept that, he is willing to go and probably look at political signals to do whatever he wants to do, there is very little that one can do about it. The regulatory system created today is independent, but the people, a majority of people, there are of course some people who act extremely independently and they do their work. But by and large what you find is that the person who becomes a regulator still looks at cues from the political masters before he decides to do anything. One more point I wanted to add to what Dr. Govinda Rao had mentioned about the distribution of power to consumers not being in the radar of the distribution company. I think that is very right. One of the reasons for that is the tariffs not being cost reflective. Every unit of power sold by a distribution company, the distribution company is going to lose money. So you will find that this is one of the strange businesses, probably one of its kind businesses, where the distribution company does not want to increase its sales because it fears that the more it sells, the more it will lose. So the first thing that we need to do is to see to it that the tariffs are cost reflective. That is when the distribution company will be interested in selling more and more power, will want to stop load shedding. Today why do they resort to load shedding? They want to control their losses, and one way of doing it is to reduce the supply of power. So unless you make sale of power a business which at least breaks even, you cannot get distribution companies to want to increase their sales. That is one of the reasons why they do not have actual supply of power to consumers in their radar.
Govind, Mr. Uma Shankar listed a number of reasons why really we have the problems in the power sector that we do. The lack of independence of the regulators, the problem of not properly fixing their tariffs, etc. And we've had, nothing really has changed in either of these areas. And we've already had 2 rescue operations in the past, one in 2001-2 under the NDA, another in 12-13 under the UPA government. And both these were singular failures. So what makes us think that the third round will be any more successful?
No, I really don't think that third round will be any successful at all. In fact, I have written my column yesterday which in the Financial Express. Now, basic issue is, as I first said, the soft budget constraint. When you may say that the mistake is not of the bankers, but the point is the bankers do lend money, and so long as they keep lending money and then rolling over the credit, you are going to, you are certainly going to, pile up problems. Now, as far as the regulators are concerned, in fact, they have never acted independently even when the Act allows them to act. But then they don't act because partly, there is nothing like a conflict of interest in our system. And basically the ex-bureaucrats, they don't really bother about this thing. I mean, there are good regulators, I am not saying that. But the basic issue is, now, one of the major things that you need to really work out on the incentive structure of the states themselves, which means that in monitoring their fiscal deficit targets, you need to include the deficit of the power sector and say that your total fiscal deficit target is this, and in fact, you've got to really to monitor the total fiscal deficit, including the power sector. That's precisely what the 14th Finance Commission said. Now, if you do that, then obviously, and then if you also put restrictions by the banking system on lending to the power distributors, even when the state governments come up, then obviously the state government will have to take care of their problems themselves. Okay, so right now, Govind, yes, I agree the state governments are very guilty, but the guilty party really in this entire business. But I'm afraid on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the mess in the discom sector and what the government's third rescue package could possibly be. Pradeep, if I may come to you now, the power sector accounts for an overwhelming share of the stressed assets of the banking sector. Approximately 53,000 crores of SEP loans are likely to be NPAs in the quarter ending September, according to the Reserve Bank of India. The proposed scheme, once again as per the leaked reports, envisages the state governments taking over the dues and issuing bonds at a lower rate of interest. But if banks are finally left with no option but to buy these bonds, then once again we'll find public sector banks holding the can, and you'll be told once again about how inefficient
question to you are vis-a-vis your private sector counterparts who steer clear of all these things. So what can public sector banks do?
Couple of things, Mythili. As far as SBI is concerned, we are not facing with an immediate threat of any NPA of any of their our exposure to the state discoms. I am told a couple of other large banks also the position is similar, but yes, we are sitting on a possibly difficult situation, some maybe a year down the line. So what the government now proposes to do, I understand, of course we are not fully aware of the package, is the entire debt of the discoms will be converted into bonds, either issued by the state government or guaranteed by the state government. And and unlike in the past FRP of the 11-12, there will be no future loss funding. Earlier in the last FRP, some loss funding was expected from the banks, and some portion of loss was funded to be by the banks and the other portion by the state government. In the current FRP, we have very clearly said that the banks will not fund any further losses. At best, we will give a working capital limit to all the state electricity, the discoms, and we have suggested that we should have a thumb rule of about 25% of the total revenue as a possible working capital limit, and banks, we have very clearly said that there should be no further loss funding by the banks. Yes, the media always likes to bash public sector banks, so we will always be seen as the villains in any of these cases. But in this case, I believe if the debt is taken over as converted as bonds, yes, we will immediately there will be a drop in our net interest margin, no doubt. But at the same time, because the entire dues are getting converted to bonds issued by the government and also guaranteed by the governments, my capital adequacy also comes down dramatically. The need for allocating capital comes down dramatically. So I lose somewhere, but I win somewhere. I think overall, I think it's a good win-win for the bank. This sort of FRP where the entire loan is being converted into a debt issued by the government or guaranteed by the government.
Okay, that's good to know that you're not that despondent about the new rescue package. But Mr. Uma Shankar, between raising the tariff, reducing the theft that is euphemistically called T&D losses, better metering, improved efficiency, better regulation, which of you think is the answer, and how would you like to prioritize these?
Okay, now just one more point to what has already been said. I heard the MD State Bank saying that in FRP 12, the banks were expected to continue to fund losses, but it was very clearly stated in the FRP 12 that funding of losses by banks would be tapered off in 3 years, and after that there will be no funding of losses by banks. That was very clearly stated. In fact, in this whole business of who should have done what so that this situation would not have arisen, I don't think anybody comes out with glory. Even banks, for instance, when the going was good, most of the banks were lending indiscriminately to distribution companies without even bothering to look at their balance sheets. Dr. Rao had mentioned that most of them did not have audited balance sheets. I do not think at a time when the money was expected to come because it was backed by state governments, no banker asked for the balance sheets of these SCBs. I don't think anybody bothered about the viability of the discoms when they were lending, and they were quite sure of getting back the money, or it could be rolled over and they could take loan from some other bank and so on. I saw in 2012, the moment a banker said I will not lend anymore, the state government, the distribution companies immediately wanted to give him a plan saying how they will raise tariffs. So if the bankers are stricter about the lending to distribution companies, I am sure that will have a very salutary effect about increasing tariffs. Now the issues that are being talked about, probably which will come in the next round of FRP, would in my opinion be the same. They would talk about stopping loss funding, they will be talking about reducing AT&C losses, there will be talk about increasing tariffs and so on, metering, all that, whatever, all those things that you mentioned. All this has also been mentioned in FRP 12. But the question is, how does the Government of India get state governments to do these things? That is the most crucial question, and I do not think Government of India has too many levers to make state governments do these things. At least from the Power Ministry I saw that we had very little leverage with the state governments to make them do what you think should be done to improve the finances of distribution companies. We need to look outside the Ministry of Power. We need to look at the entire Government of India system to see how we can put pressure on the distribution companies and the states to act in a way that the state distribution companies become financially viable. In fact, we had prepared at that time a state distribution company responsibility bill. A model bill was prepared. It was circulated to the state governments. We wanted state governments to pass that bill, which will squarely put before the state governments that it is their responsibility to run the distribution companies viably. So the key question at the end of all this would be, you can have this third FRP, fourth FRP. The question will be, how can the Government of India force state governments to ensure that distribution companies are viable?
Let me ask Govind that question, since he was a member of the 14th Finance Commission. Govind, Mr. Uma Shankar feels that the centre has very few levers of power over the state governments. But if you look at, PFC, Power Finance Corporation and NTPC, one very good lever that the central government has is by way of tripartite agreements, where the centre, is given the right. The state governments allow the centre to debit their accounts for the dues. Now, can't we think in terms of a similar tripartite agreement for the dues of the SEBs also?
Point is that, they can certainly have a tripartite agreement, but the leverage they have is in regard to the grants that they give and the borrowing powers that they can allow. They can't, the Constitution does not allow them to touch the tax devolution. If somebody says that we are going to touch the tax devolution, I think it's dangerous, because tax devolution is state's revenue. That cannot be touched. But the point is that they can certainly say that, this is the total amount of borrowing. They can also instruct the public sector banks that, look, you cannot give loans for covering cash losses. There is no way you can give loans to cover losses. You have to basically look at the viability of a project before lending, and it is your responsibility. And even if the state government give guarantees, you don't lend. You can give those instructions, because the lending by the commercial banks should be purely on commercial principles. If you do that, and if you say that it is overall fiscal deficit, which includes the power sector deficit, will be monitored. If there is a problem, the state governments will have to borrow and on-lend it to the discoms. That is the way you will have to proceed, because you will have to make the state governments fully responsible for their actions in not allowing the discoms to raise the tariffs, and not facilitating them to reduce the technical and commercial losses. This is the only way that you can go about, because the structure of incentives for the states will have to be brought into the picture. The states basically push everything to the discoms and then just sit pretty, and that is not on.
Let me give you the last word once again, Govind, since you've dealt so extensively with state governments. Are state governments' fear of political backlash of raising tariffs, are they overdone? Very quickly, if I could ask you that question.
You see, the point is that, if you do not raise the tariffs for years together, like in the case of Tamil Nadu or in the case of Rajasthan, then you say that, oh, now this is very too much. But the point is, you have got to, and if you go on saying that, I'll give free electricity to the farmers, and don't separate the feeders for the farm sector, and then you've got to start doing things. You've got to start providing quality electricity. All these, as I mentioned, today, for example, in Karnataka, they say that they are going to have a 4-hour power cut. This is not the issue of finances. It is simply that the cost of purchasing power is more than the cost of selling power, and therefore I want to reduce the losses, so I will have a power outage. Now, the providing stable and power in a sustainable manner is the most important issue, and then of course finances is equally important, that has to be taken. The reforms have to be comprehensive, and obviously state governments will have to be made responsible for this entire thing, and then they will also allow the regulators to do it. You can't really postpone the decisions for raising tariffs, or you can't postpone decisions on investment in distribution systems, so that and of course prevention of theft. All these things will have to be done.
Well, absolutely, Govind, yes, but given how intractable the problem has proved in all these years, frankly, our discussion could go on forever. But I'm afraid this is all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Mythili. The powerful message, if I may pardon the pun, is that where there is a will, or rather a political will, there is a way. Thank you so much, Mr. Uma Shankar, Govind, as well as Pradeep, for joining me in this discussion.
Thank you
also for watching. We'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.